felt about it the whole time was that it was simply going to be a berm as we remember them to be in a different place. That was my assumption of it, and basically that's what it boils down to. The second part of the meeting, obviously, is to give you the opportunity to ask questions and make comments. So it's very cut and dry. It's very straightforward. I'm personally estimating we'll be here hour and a half, give or take. That is in no way a time limit. That's just my guess at what we're getting into. What I would like to do at this point is, if you'll give me the pleasure of going over some of the information that we handed out to you. I understand everybody can read, but there'll be a few little things in between that I'll insert or maybe better explain that maybe this paper doesn't quite do justice. When I get finished, what I will do at that point, I will ask the council members if any of them would like to make any comments or any corrections to whatever it is I've said. And once we finish with the council, then we'll open the floor up for your questions and comments. So anyway, that's the way I've envisioned this, and again, I appreciate you coming, so let's get started. First of all, I think we all know that we did have a berm in place pre-Dauphin, and they kind of did a number on it and basically wiped the berm out, knocked it down, no longer in the shape that it was in. Following those particular storms, the town, as it always does, submitted its damage survey reports to FEMA, which included the berm. In other words, when we get a declared disaster, it's the town's responsibility to inventory all the damages throughout the town that are town property. That's infrastructure, could be buildings, could be anything that the town owns. We have to submit it, and it's a very short time frame for the initial submittal. So we've submitted it, and the berm being in place as it was, the berm was one of the things that got submitted. Once FEMA got those informations or damage reports, they notified us at some subsequent time that they would not fund a replacement berm, or at least not in the place that it was in. And their main issue was, as it was stated, they just didn't feel that there was a stable landscape along the Gulf beach front this time to put a berm that would have any type of long-lasting effects at all. One of the things they stated in there is that, not only is a berm in that area subject to, obviously, hurricanes or tropical storms, but it's also subject to the day in and day out just wave action, which we all know kind of works on it on its own. So when FEMA notified us that they were going to deny the request to replace the berm, we then had an option. The town had an option, and the option was either we just take that and go with it, or we appeal that particular decision. The council chose to appeal the decision. I personally agree with that. I spoke for that, so that if nothing else, we could at least keep dialogue open, maybe looking for alternatives to do something that would be more long-lasting, more permanent in nature. But that's why I suggested that we keep the communications going on that. That's kind of why we're here tonight, I guess. FEMA, after we appealed the refusal, we then submitted our information as what we thought was appropriate about the berm on the front beach line. Some of you are probably aware we contracted with a company called Tridex. They did the aerial photos, they did the ground level photos, three-dimensional, very high tech. I can't even speak to what it can do, but it's very high tech stuff. That came on board pretty much along this same time. That technology was used in support of us in appealing the berm refusal. When we did that, FEMA looked at it, reviewed it, and they basically said, we see what you're saying, but we still don't agree. And so the final decision was made that they would not entertain replacing a berm along the shoreline. So that is sort of off the table. With that being the case, the town has essentially one other opportunity to appeal, okay? And that means that we now know that, okay, they're not going to put it back on the shoreline. What else can we do? And one of the things that's possible, I guess, is probably the best way to put it, is this berm that is moved farther inland, and it's being recommended that it be placed on the town's right-of-way. This suggestion, I guess you would say, came from at least one or maybe two meetings that town staff and other representatives of the town had with the Alabama EMA, and the EMA is Emergency Management Agency, okay? And the chain of command is on this, for those of you who don't know, the town talks to State EMA. State EMA talks to FEMA. FEMA talks back to the state, and the state talks back to us. So essentially, State EMA is our middleman, if you will, in this process. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it's set up. So that's why the meetings were held at the state level on what could be done as in addition to or in exchange for this berm that's no longer going to be placed along the shoreline. And this is where it gets sort of complex, and I'm going to have to try to explain some things as best I can here. Understanding, first of all, that what we're talking about here is a very narrow scope. We're talking about the fact that we had a berm pre-Gustav and Ike. Afterwards, we didn't have one anymore. And the only thing we're talking about here is potentially replacing that berm, okay? So what that says has several things. First of all, it says that we don't have a lot of latitude to say, well, instead of putting sand in a pile along the side of the road, why don't you do rocks? Why don't you do a seawall? Why don't you name something, okay? The thing of it is, for that specific program, we can't do that, okay? It's basically, if you take the money, it's for that purpose, okay? The latitude, if you will, would be the part of, well, you can put it here or you can put it there, but you can't say, well, instead of a berm, we'd like to have, a brick wall or something like that. This program doesn't apply to that. I'm just trying to specify that because it's an apples and orange kind of a thing here. We got to understand what we're talking about here, and all the other ideas that we may hear or may feel are better or what have you. That's okay to have those ideas. It's okay to pursue those as we're doing, but it's not something that we can integrate into this particular issue. The other part of this is we mentioned about category B. Yes, category B is in boy, and again, that probably means very little to most of you all, and it wouldn't mean much to me had I not been mayor through 8 or 10 storms now. But category B is essentially a FEMA lingo thing that says it's for emergency protective measures. Okay? That's the narrow scope of what I'm talking about. So anything in this category B is all that's eligible, and it's pretty narrow again. So hopefully that helps just a little bit on exactly what we're talking about. Now, so where are we now? Well, first of all, it is up to the town at this point to decide, one, if we're going to submit something back through EMA to FEMA for their consideration. Let's just assume for a minute that we like this idea of this berm on the side of the road that we're talking about, and we're going to kind of package this up, send it to the state, and ask them to forward it to FEMA. First of all, we'll have to make that decision if we're going to do that. Second thing is, if we do that, FEMA will then make a determination as to whether it will or will not fund that particular project, okay? If they say, yeah, that looks pretty good, we'll go with it, or let's do a little modification here, there, and yonder, and then we can go with it, then it'll come back to the town, and the town will then have an opportunity to say yes or no, finally, okay? So that's sort of the process that's out in front of us. Timing on this is rather close. My count is, we got a memo from the state EMA a few days back that said we had 60 days, 50 days, 60 days to come back with our proposal or whatever it is we're going to submit. According to my count, that would put us at June 28th, 2009 as the absolute deadline for us to notify State EMA as to what our intentions are. I'll just say for the fun of it, June 28th falls on a Sunday. So again, I may be off a day in counting. If it falls on a Sunday, then obviously we would have to probably back up to that Friday, which would be the 26th. So let's kind of leave that at that for the time being. Now, when you go into the idea of assuming this type of a structure is going to be put in place, let's talk about whether you call them pros and cons, goods or bads. I chose to put down benefits and challenges. You know, call it what you will. But let's talk about on the positive side. First of all, if we place the berm away from the surf zone, it would likely increase the life expectancy of the berm. I think we can probably all kind of buy into that. You know, if it's on the shoreline, it's going to be hit by the waves continually. If it's up by the roadside, it's probably going to take more of a real storm to actually get to it, at least in a violent way. Let's put it that way. So that's one thing that I guess we could look at, that it would have a longer life, if we were to move it up closer to the road. Another point of the matter is that the cost of the berm, which we don't know at this point what it would cost, we don't have any dimensions, all that's still left to be determined. We don't have specs, if you will. We don't have a template tonight to show you how big, how tall. We kind of got an idea. I mean, if you all remember seeing the previous berms, okay, if you've seen them, I think it'd be fair to estimate that that would be probably close to what it would look like, okay? Approximately 15 or so feet across the base, pyramid type shape, maybe 6 to 8 feet tall, maybe 3 to 4 feet across the top, just roughly. And that's just me telling you the way it was before. That doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. But anyway, at this particular point, if we submit that we want to do this or something similar, it would be part of the normal cost share, which is 75 federal, 10 state. 15% would come to the town. So the town would be responsible for picking up 15% of the cost of this structure. Easy access for us to do maintenance on the berm. Now, that kind of flies in the face when we talk about, I'm getting into some access issues here on the next level. But as far as if the berm was put in place, yes, it would be easier for the town to quote, maintain it, to put additional sand on top from time to time as we get it from the ditches or whatever the case may be, to shore it back up if in fact it started to weather away. It would be, you know, obviously easier for us to access and to stabilize it. Now the next item I put in italics because it falls, in my opinion, under both goods and bads, and I'll try to explain. First of all, what really has brought this to the table is the notion or the concern that unless we do something to try to protect Bienville Boulevard and the infrastructure, be it water pipes or whatever else that's within the Bienville Boulevard right-of-ways, we may find ourselves in a subsequent storm without federal or state assistance to replace the infrastructure in the Bienville Boulevard right-of-way. And I know what you're thinking, that, well, yeah, I understand what you mean, we're going to protect the Bienville Boulevard right-of-way, but if we do that in the way that we're talking, we're also going to leave some infrastructure exposed on the south side of the berm. Roads, signage, water, sewer, all those things. Yes, that is true, and we'll touch on that down here. But anyway, that is really what has brought this thing to a head, is that stick, if you will, to say that, well, you know, we really don't know what's coming down the pipe here, but unless something is done to try to give some protection for the Bienville Boulevard right-of-way and the road itself, it could be a time coming that you may not get future assistance. So that's the big stick, in my opinion, of what's being held over our heads to some extent. There is there's nothing in writing on that. I mean, we met with the EMA official last Friday, I guess it was. There's nothing really in writing from there, but I guess in the dialogues that the state and the feds have had, some of this stuff has kind of come to surface maybe, and it's really kind of hard to pinpoint. I mean, assuming we were to have a storm this year, which we're not, but assuming we were going to have a storm this year, I don't know what would happen after that, but I would assume that we would go through this similar process that we always do. We'd come out, we'd do our damage survey assessments, we'd submit them to state and feds and, you know, fix things as we go. one of the issues, I guess, that hangs out there is after we submit all this stuff is it possible that FEMA would come back and say, you know, we're not going to be able to help you this time? Well, I don't know, and I don't want to get into just saying what I think, and I have a thought about that, but maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But anyway, that's sort of an unknown. A lot of it has to do, in my opinion, with, here I go, with severity of the storm. How bad is the situation? Is it a minor damage? Is it very significant damage? I think there's a lot of variables there that we really don't know as we sit here to know what's going to happen. You know, but anyway, that's my take. Now, the challenges, and again, I'm going to go right back into the one we just talked about as being a benefit. And the benefit part of that being that supposedly if we put this berm in place, we will have done our job, if you will, as a community to help protect the road. Therefore, if we get a storm that does do severe damage to Bienville Boulevard and all the other infrastructures, then we would be more likely to get the assistance that we've come to recognize. That's supposedly the plus side. You understand? If we build it, if we put the berm there, we have done our job, and so therefore we may be more eligible, if you would, for federal and state assistance in a post-disaster situation. We've got to remember these are declared disasters too. It makes a difference on whether or not it's a declared disaster or whether it's just a bad storm, bad day, bad rain squall or something. So those are issues too. Now let's go into challenges. Again, the same one again, the future post-disaster support. I guess the reason I put it in there is it's sort of like, well, if we don't do it, it's sort of that hanging out there that we didn't take the opportunity to protect the infrastructure, and therefore now we have lost an opportunity to do so. The other part of that would be that at this point, as I mentioned just a minute ago, if we were to do it now, we would get the cost share that we talked about earlier, the 75, 10, 15. Probably if we don't do it at this point, and say we have a storm or something happens, and then FEMA comes in and makes the repairs and says, okay, we're doing this is the last time we're going to do it, you need to put some protection in to protect the road, or we're not going to help you next time. I'm just ad-libbing here, okay? But that's the scenario. Now, in other words, if we did not have something in place, if we do not have something in place and we have a storm, then the next time that if we're required to put some kind of mitigation in to protect the road, it would likely be at 100% cost to us. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make. Right now it's a 15% berm. A later berm, if we don't catch this window of opportunity, would very likely be a 100% berm. Okay. That's the differential. Next item. Obviously, the first thing comes to mind, when you hear about putting a berm up and it's going to essentially block access to the side streets, then the first question is, well, how do people get to their houses? And that's an easy question to come up with. It's a lot harder answer to come up with, but certainly that's a negative to the idea of having a berm in place that would prohibit the normal access as we've come to know down there, because it would cut across the side streets, and we were told, we're understanding that we would not be allowed to put crossovers. We hammered that for a while, but they're saying, no, you're not going to be able to do that. What we've talked about just amongst the council is that we would look at trying to provide some kind of what we call a service road. And that would require, obviously, access around the end of the berm, which is still not definite. I mean, that would be something that would have to come out of the specs of the templates and all. Where's it going to start? Where is it going to end? Because you have to have an end to get your access point to. So that's being talked about. But certainly access, both vehicular and pedestrian, would be an issue. I do feel like that pedestrian type walkovers might be an easier sell because they were there when the berm was there. And that's an important point, folks, is essentially the assistance we're talking about here is to replace what was there. So we need to keep that in the back of our minds. Vehicular traffic can be our own vehicles. Certainly, it also translates into emergency response vehicles, fire medical, ambulance, those type of things. We have to consider those situations, and that will have to be taken into account. The cost of constructing and maintaining this service road, we don't have the numbers on that either, okay? Somebody mentioned to me today, they said, well, if you don't know any of this stuff, why are you having a meeting tonight? What are you going to tell anybody? It's like, well, the main thing is to try to let you know what we're trying to deal with, okay? Like I said, I'd like to put you in our shoes, and you'll put me in your shoes in a little bit. But essentially, there are some things, obviously, that we don't know right now. There are some things about this that I don't even think the state EMA can say for sure this is what's going to happen, or this is what will or won't happen, because it all comes down, at the end of the day, to FEMA, and that changes readily, believe me, not only from storm to storm, but from almost FEMA rep to FEMA rep. We've dealt with that a lot in the past years. But anyway, the cost of building this service road south of the berm, we don't have a cost on that, but we're pretty sure that it would be a cost that the town would have to bear 100%. That would not be part of the berm cost, because it was not one there before. Infrastructure, assuming the berm is put in place like we're talking about, any infrastructure that is then left south of the berm would be left on its own to the extent that it would be town responsibility, Dauphin water sewer responsibility. Whoever has utilities out there or infrastructure out there, it would be their responsibility. FEMA basically would not cover any future damage cost associated with infrastructure that was then south of the berm, okay? Utilities, I touched on the water and sewer. Certainly, Alabama Power Company, I contacted one of their representatives a couple of weeks ago to let them know this was being talked about. One of the things I thought about, or we thought about, was the elevation that power lines have to be above the ground. I mean, I don't know exactly where this berm would go, but if it fell below the power lines, is that going to then have a less than adequate elevation clearance from the power lines? I don't know that. Okay, I don't know that. But that was one thing that came to my mind, other than simply they're getting to the poles, getting to the wires. Is it going to complicate their life? So I notified them of the meeting, of this idea. Certainly water and sewer has been in on the loop on this. They have, and they can speak to their own issues and concerns. Adverse economic impacts, I don't know that I can quantify what that might be, but certainly those of you who are in the real estate world, or even private homeowner who rents their property, I know I've had people suggest to me that this would probably reduce the amount of rentals that they can pull off down there, okay? And that, if so, that's going to reduce the taxes that the town gets. It's going to potentially even reduce tourism, because people may not want to use those houses or rent those houses as much as they do currently. So I don't know that that's quantifiable at this point. Some of you may have some numbers with you, but certainly it's a concern or a concept that's out there that this could create some ill effects when it comes to the economic impacts for the island. And finally, I say finally, I'm not at all suggesting that these benefits and challenges are all inclusive, okay? I'm sure you'll come up with a lot more. But these are some of the hot button items, if you would, I felt like. But my personal opinion is, and here I go again, I think ultimately a lot of this is going to come down to legal issues, okay? As to, what's going to happen. I mean, I had, hear people say, well, it's adverse condemnation, it's a takings, it's you name it what you will, and that'll all come out in the wash. I don't know how to handle that, but I do say that all of these other things I think are, I'll say, manageable. We can talk about them, we can kind of work through them, and we can deal with them. But when it comes to the legal issues, it gets sort of out of our hands to some extent. We get into an arena that's outside of this room or outside of this island, and I don't think we can really speculate, or at least I won't speculate, where that might end up. let me, in closing, just say that the town is working on numerous areas to try to get some long-term shoreline stabilization efforts going for this community. We've been doing it really hot and heavy for the last couple of years. Ultimately, I think I think we can probably all agree that that's really what's needed is to do something that's gonna be more long-lasting and is gonna give us the level of protection that we need for many years to come, so we can all go back to enjoying the island that we've always come to love, okay? And the town is working feverishly on that, and I know it's slow, it's frustrating, it's a lot of other things that you can probably think of, but I personally am more positive at this point than I've ever been. And that doesn't mean that we're gonna have a silver bullet tomorrow, but it does mean that we are, in my opinion again, more down the road, if you will, on different areas of trying to get some support. One of them is this, you've probably been familiar with this Mississippi project. We kind of refer to it as the Mississippi project. You've probably seen where the Corps is potentially going to be doing I think it was $450 million or whatever the case might be to beef up their barrier islands off from the Mississippi mainland in order to help protect the mainland. We were kind of like saying, well, you know, how did we get left out of that? So we've really worked hard on an effort. Glenn Coffey has come to the town and we've partnered with him. He's taken the lead on that particular item and issue. And we hope, we don't know how that'll shake out, but we've got the attention of a lot of folks, a lot of elected officials, both now it's the governor, our elected representatives, senators, but also our congressional delegation. And we're working hard to pursue that, but ultimately it's not our decision to make. But we hope that through the efforts that we're doing, the efforts that you do to send letters when you're asked to send letters, we're all in this together, and we got to work together on it. So that's one way. We've got a request currently pending with NOAA for some monies to work on. That's for the East End. I'll explain that briefly, but that has been going now for several years. Okay, and so that's why that's coming in the line. Now that the transfer of property has been handled for the West End, the West Surf Beach issue, then it's all now, we're looking at the whole island at this point. We're not segregated to one end or the other, but it's all kind of come together now. We're working in one direction.